I just got some reaction. I'm joined by Nsfas, the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students, one of the bodies that would have been in consultation with the minister over the weekend. Nsfas, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. If you look at the improvements that are said to be coming on the system, they have very little to do with the things that you've been raising, even the minister saying there. I mean, issues around the performance of Nsfas, issues around the review of the student funding model, issues around work that needs to be done, particularly around accommodation. What made you sit in that meeting and come out and say, well, we can go ahead and open the applications on Friday?
Good evening, Butabo, and to your viewers and your listeners, and thank you for having us. Look, the first thing is that obviously applications must open as soon as possible so that students are able to apply. With that happening, we needed to ensure, one of the things we had to ensure in the meeting was that the applications can open seamlessly, or rather seamlessly as possible, and to ensure that the interface itself was user-friendly and accessible, particularly to those of the most marginalized community. So that's the first area, because unfortunately, which I'll speak also to the second area, is that when you are running or when you are part of or contributing to a huge a system like Nsfas and generally access to higher education, because Nsfas is really a tool towards access, particularly for the poor and the working class, is that you can't stop one thing to do something else. Often the work must be done simultaneously. So you are correct. Much of the presentation and the press briefing today, and much even of our meeting, to be quite honest with you, did not necessarily deal in depthly with some of the issues which you raised, although we spoke about them. But unfortunately, we have to ensure that applications are open so that whilst that happens, we are able to deal with the more structural, and because some of the challenges you mentioned are some of them are more strategic and more structural. So now that's the second part of the engagements which we spoke about. One of the issues which we stressed, which we were with the minister, we welcome the fact that the minister was amenable to this and made a commitment, I believe even at the press briefing, was that more than anything, we also needed to decentralize Nsfas, that albeit the challenges that it have, at the very least, we need to ensure that it is accessible. So a commitment has been made by the minister that in the preliminary stages that we are going to see in the next few months an establishment of Nsfas in Gauteng, in KZN, and in Eastern Cape, at a preliminary stage, and ensure that in other provinces we have satellite Nsfas offices. So that's a huge win for us. That's one of the things that we would have discussed, which will also ensure that it will also assist us to broaden access to Nsfas and ultimately to higher education. And then obviously there are structural issues which we spoke about in terms of, for instance, the funding model itself and the extent to which it also impedes what we have been calling for ultimately, which is free education, particularly for the missing middle students and students doing their postgraduate studies, to which again we received a commitment from the minister with the follow-up meeting in terms of the nitty-gritties, but really also to build on the work of the previous administration that saw the introduction of the loan scheme, particularly for the children of the missing middle.
Yeah, let's talk about the systems upgrade. We'll come back to that in a moment. Two things. Firstly, that you need to give me your views on the targets that have been set. For example, targets for enrollment being 2.5 in public and private TVET colleges, and the targeting of 1.6 million enrollments from university students by 2030. Do you think these are achievable? These will create access, as you put it. More people will want to access these spaces.
Look, those are the NDP targets, which we have all, I suppose, have committed to. The reality is that with the current framework and setup of and the interrelations between basic education and higher education, we most likely would not be able to meet those targets. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. One of that is about changing completely the psyche, the understanding, and generally the framework around how do we understand basic education and how do we understand that to translate ultimately into higher education. And I think we have not been able to do that effectively. We have been saying almost at the risk of sounding rhetorically that we must make TVET institutions of choice, and that is not happening. So one of the things which I suppose we can welcome now will be the ability for grade 9, grade 10, and grade 11 learners to be able to apply for Nsfas. We believe that in itself is a huge intervention, because it will serve, one, not only as an incentive, but also it's going to serve as a leeway, and it will broaden the possibilities for students in grade 9 and in grade 8 and in grade 9 to know that actually they have an option to get into the vocational and technical space in terms of higher education. So that's a huge, obviously, intervention. But overall, we need more interventions to ensure that we can't speak the 2.5 million enrollments into being. We need deliberate strategies. Yes. And to that effect, we have been lacking as a country to ensure that with the university enrollment, it's not going to be difficult. We're already sitting at 1.1 million. The only challenge I foresee is that is the question of will the infrastructure be able to keep up with those enrollments, because the building of universities is a very capital intensive project, not only in terms of money, but in terms of ensuring that you are able to broaden academia to service that particular university. So that's our only concern as the union, is the extent to which are we willing, is the state willing to invest aggressively enough in terms of you have to build new universities. There's no other way if you are going to reach that 1.6 million target. So if we deal with those structural and infrastructural issues, and in terms of creating systems to broaden the TVET sector from grade 9, then I think we might be able to meet those targets. But as things stand with the current systems that are in place, we most likely probably would not meet those NDP targets.
So let's talk about then the other issue. I mean, we've had you on this show numerous times, talks about this skills mismatch, which of course you deny exists because of what you would have expanded on. But now there is an intervention that seeks to align what is in the National Skills Database and the orientation of our curriculum, but two, a better system for the absorption of graduates. What do you make of that intervention?
Look, in terms of if I'm understanding your question correctly, what we have been calling for and that the department has been committing to is that we need to relook, generally speaking, the output of higher education to the extent to which it is able to respond, one, to the socio-economic developmental needs of the country, but also to the immediate market needs, etc. So to that extent, we have done, dare I say, a lousy job to be able to ensure that we deal with that. And we have said, well, let us find a way to also use government funding to be able to channel the output in higher education towards that particular end. But however, we are still hampered, and this also came actually quite very strongly even in our meetings, by the incongruency between basic education and higher education in South Africa. The gap is just too vast for us to be able to do that. I mean, I can give you a very small, stupid example. Just in terms of the release of the matric results itself, you would swear that the matric results are released by another country and higher education is in another country completely, because the systems don't speak to each other. So to that extent, a lot of work needs to be done. We've considered to that effect that we do not think that the 50 billion, for instance, just in Nsfas alone that we're investing, that we are reaping the benefits thereof in terms of ensuring that we are able to produce graduates that are compatible with the needs, with the socioeconomic needs of the country, but also that can be able to create employment and get into employment.
Nsfas, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. That is the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students, of course, reacting to news by the Department of Higher Education that the online application process for Nsfas will go live on Friday.